The drugs that we have are not fully utilized to treat every disease that they possibly can. And it's our mission to take all that incredible work and just do the little bit of more effort it takes to find the additional diseases that they could potentially treat.
This kind of R&D would cost trillions of dollars for traditional pharma.
The pharmaceutical industry, I don't demonize them at all. They do an incredible job at generating novel compounds. It's not their fault that there's just no incentive to pursue additional research around drugs that are off patent and are generic. We take those drugs and we go after diseases that are totally neglected by the pharmaceutical industry. There's so much low-hanging fruit with the 3,000 drugs that already exist. We're going to spend years and years unlocking the life-saving potential of those.
You make it very easy to want to give you money. Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. Today, I have a very special guest, a member of my family. Well, kind of a member of my family, Dr. Grant Mitchell, who, man, Grant, you have more degrees and qualifications than virtually anyone else in this family. You are a medical doctor. You are an MBA. You are ex-McKinsey. You are an expert in machine learning and AI. And today we're going to talk about the company you founded, Every Cure, whose mission is essentially to say that there are lots of people out there with diseases for which there is no acknowledged treatment. And you and your partner are on a mission to take a look at not only all existing drugs, but also combination of new drugs to try to find cures for 3,000 diseases or more that have no effective treatment. Grant, welcome.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Jim. And the problem is more dire than you even portrayed there. It's actually around, depending on the definition of disease you choose, 22,000 diseases.
Oh.
And the vast majority of which are both rare and have no single approved treatment. So that means that 1 in 10 people in this world will develop a disease that has no FDA-approved treatment. So the doctor will have to say, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do quite yet for this." And the hypothesis that we have, that we're very certain is true, is that the 3,000 or so existing drugs that we already have can treat a lot of these diseases. And there's certain barriers that exist that disincentivize this kind of research. But the organization that we've launched called Every Cure is designed to overcome those barriers and pursue that research and make sure that patients get these treatments.
I recall a lunch many years ago that you and I had in Union Square, and you were working on something similar then. Talk a little bit about that, because we chatted before starting the recording about it, but you've been at this a long time.
Yeah, the origin really goes back before I even knew what, the word machine learning was. And it all started in medical school. I went to medical school at Penn and I did a combined degree for an MBA there at Wharton as well. And my roommate at the time, a guy named David Fagenbaum, who's now a co-founder at Every Cure, he was, first of all, he's an incredibly healthy person. He used to be the quarterback at Georgetown, and he was, a weightlifting fanatic. And we were in med school together, and he walks into the living room in our apartment, and he says, "Grant, something is just wrong. I feel like I'm going to die." I said, "What? What are you talking about, David? You're the healthiest guy I know." And just a few short weeks later, he was in the ICU and nearly in a coma. His organs were shutting down. He could barely function, and he nearly lost his life. He was so close to death that a priest came in and read him his last rites. I literally hugged him goodbye. Never thought I was going to see him again. But amazingly, he survived, probably because he had such a strong baseline to begin with. And the only way to stop what was happening in his body at that time was to obliterate his immune system with 7-agent chemo so that his immune system could stop attacking every organ in his body. Well, the cadence of that disease, the way it ended up working was you'd have a flare where a cytokine storm and an immune reaction attacks everything in your body. Then you have full-blown chemo to stop it, and then you're healthy for a while, and then it happens again about every 8 to 12 months. And you can only go through that cycle so many times until it kills you. And so he was given probably 3 years to live. And we, being naive, early 20-year-olds, 20-something-year-olds, we looked at this problem and said, well, if no one else is working on this, I guess we will. David himself said, well, I have nothing better to do. I've got 3 years to figure this out. And so, we called every researcher in the world, invited them to a conference that we thought they might be interested in already attending anyway. And we sat at the front of the room and said, hi, this is David and this is Grant, and we're here to cure Castleman disease. And they all kind of chuckled and said, good luck, kids. But what we realized is that these 20 or so researchers that were the only ones in the world that knew anything about this thing, but they weren't working together. And just as much as it was a science problem to try and figure out how this disease worked in David's body, it was an organizational and stakeholder alignment problem to get everyone to work effectively in a cohesive, constructive way that made sense to elucidate our understanding of the disease in the most efficient way possible. And as we did that, we would study David's blood and try and identify patterns in the way that the cytokines were expressing themselves, and to see if maybe we could figure out which pathway was actually going wrong in his body. And then we would start testing drugs on him that ultimately, after about 3 years, with almost no time left, found a drug that ultimately put him into remission. So, given these flares came every 8 to 12 months, we were on the edge of our seat, for month 8, month 12 went by, month 13, 14, 16, 18, 2 years went by, and I said, my God, I think he's okay. And so it's been over 10 years now. Just last month, we marked 10 years that he's been in remission. It's been completely healthy. He's gone on to get married, have 2 kids. He helps run the Orphan Disease Center here at the University of Pennsylvania, where he also has his own lab that studies cytokine disorders, and gone on to repurpose another 15 or 16 drugs in both his disease, which is called Castleman disease, other diseases like angiosarcoma, and even COVID. And so the essence of what we were doing was, trying to understand the underlying mechanisms of these diseases, and then finding drugs that already exist that align with those mechanisms, so we don't have to spend $1 billion in 10 years to develop a whole new drug, which we didn't have the time or money to do. It was to move quickly to identify drugs we already have that might hit these pathways that are shared with the original indication that they were approved for. And that's where we really uncovered this issue. And so David was off in the lab doing this in a more lab-focused, scientific, basic science way. And my career took me off into a different place. I launched a health technology company, a couple different ones during med school and during business school. And then I went off to work for McKinsey for a number of years in the Silicon Valley office, and then later on in their machine learning division called Quantum Black, based out of London. And there I was leading teams that were really pioneering the use of large medical record databases to identify subpopulations where a drug might perform better, might be higher in efficacy or better in safety. And we realized that that's really, in a way, it's kind of drug repurposing. It's taking a drug and finding a population where it works a little bit better in, a drug that already exists. And as David was working in the lab and I was working in the data, we kind of came together and we say, can we automate what we've done? Can we scale what we've done in just one disease? And given the explosion in the amount of data that exists out there, and the explosion or the improvements in the way that we can harmonize and integrate the data into one place, and then the models that have been built to analyze that data, we thought that maybe it would be possible. Now we would check in every few years. 2016, 2017 wasn't really possible. We had this dream for a long time. 2018, 2019 is probably when I was talking to you, and I was thinking about, can we do this? And really, lately, it's become possible, especially with, like I said before, more data, structured better. You have models like these large language models that are able to digest all of medical literature, output it in a structured fashion, compile it into a biomedical knowledge graph. These really interesting ways to display and analyze this kind of data. And ultimately, that's how every cure was formed. Was the concept that the drugs that we have are not fully utilized to treat every disease that they possibly can, and we can utilize artificial intelligence to unlock their life-saving potential.
Wow. Just so incredibly impressive. And, a million questions spring to mind. As you know, my oldest sister, Lael, died of lupus. And when you said the cytokine storm, she had a kind of a similar thing where she would go into remission and then there'd be a massive attack. And it wasn't like clockwork, like your colleagues. But when she died in 1971, it was like nobody knew very much at all about the disease. And in this case, did you find that the cure that worked for your colleague, was that transferable to other people with the similar disease?
Yeah, so the cure that worked for him, we studied his blood, we sampled his lymph nodes, we did immunohistochemistry and flow cytometry, and basically found that there's cytokines were elevated. Another molecule called VEGF is elevated. There's T cell activation. This all pointed towards something called the mTOR pathway, and started looking at different drugs that would hit that pathway. Settled on a drug called sirolimus. Sirolimus has been around for decades. It's actually isolated from a fungus found in the soil on Easter Island. It's amazing, right? And it shuts down the overactivation of this pathway that leads to this cascade that causes this whole cytokine storm. For David, it works perfectly, and it also works for about a third of the other patients that have disease like David. And so that's resulted in, the benefit to countless, thousands and thousands of patients' lives. So it's a pretty thrilling and satisfying and motivating thing to be able to figure something like that out, and to be able to do it, to have the opportunity to do it more and at scale, and have the opportunity to save potentially millions of lives is a huge motivation for my team. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm pretty involved through investment and other areas in AI and AI development, and it's actually one of the use cases that I find the most exciting, because the number of people who are suffering and need not be suffering just through efforts like your own is in the millions. And what an amazing use case for this technology. You mentioned that it helped about a third of other people with the disease. And when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned something about looking at patients who have a certain disease, but are in some way resilient. And even though they have that particular disease, their genome has some kind of pattern in it that either blocks or diminishes or ameliorates the condition. Are you doing that type of work as well? For example, when you find one of and vice versa, when you find one of the 2/3 that it doesn't work for, are you seeing things in their genome that gives you the reason for why it's not working?
Yeah, so we aren't doing that work specifically, but the way our organization is designed is that we incorporate that work into our data set. And so we're actually a nonprofit organization, and we designed ourselves as a nonprofit. For years we thought, okay, how do we make this into a business? What we did with Castleman disease, and we just kind of couldn't figure it out, because we're going after drugs we don't own. and we're going after diseases that are neglected in small populations, there's just not really a business there. So we couldn't quite piece it together, and it was really an aha moment that this is design. It should be designed as a nonprofit, and it should be an AI company, because if you're want to build the world's best AI platform for drug repurposing, you're going to need the world's best data set to train it, and you're not going to get your hands on all the data that you want to get your hands on if you're a competitor to all these people that are trying to use this data. So we're collaborative, we're non-competitive, we are not profit seeking. Our primary goal is to relieve patient suffering and save patient lives. So I'll get to your question about how we're utilizing that kind of resiliency data that I mentioned before. But first, I'm going to help you understand how we use it. I'm going to describe the kind of data set that we're constructing. And it's something called a biomedical knowledge graph. It's well known in the areas and the fields that we're in, but maybe not a commonly known term to the layman. But it's effectively a representation in 3D vector space of all of the biomedical knowledge we have as humanity. Every drug, every target, every protein, every gene, every pathway, cell type, organ system, et cetera, and how they relate to different phenotypes, symptoms, and diseases. And so every one of those biomedical concepts that I just described would be represented as a node. And then every relationship that concept has with another relationship, like a drug treats a disease, there would be an edge. And so that's kind of they call it a semantic triple: drug treats disease. So you've got a node, an edge, and a node. And imagine a graph of every known, signaling molecule and protein and concept you can imagine, tens of millions of nodes, even more edges, representing all of human knowledge in biology. And that's what multiple people have constructed. Actually, NIH funded a program called the NCATS Translator Program, where a number of these knowledge graphs have been constructed. Other groups are doing it. A lot of private companies have their own. We are compiling them and integrating it with an integration layer that kind of takes the best from the top public ones, and then layers in additional proprietary data that we get from other organizations or data that we generate on our own. And the example that you just mentioned, a company that is working on tracking genetic diseases and groups of people with the same genetic disease, and looking at subpopulations within that group where there might be some resilience to the mutation, and then studying their genome to say, okay, what other proteins are being transcribed that might be protective against this mutation, and then going out and designing drugs that might mimic that protection. Well, how's that data going to fit into my knowledge graph? Well, you can imagine that if I have the data set that they're working with, I know that there's a mutation that results in a disease, so a gene associated with disease, that's a node, an edge, and a node. And I also know that this other protein is protective of that disease. So that's just information that goes into the graph. And the more truth that I put into that graph, the more I can train that graph to identify patterns of successful examples of a drug working for a disease. And then it can try and find that pattern elsewhere, where it finds it either identifies a nodes and edges that should already be connected or are connected in our knowledge base, but no one has actually acted on, or it can maybe even generate a hypothesis on a totally new edge that is novel and has never been considered before by experts before. So to answer your question again is, we're not doing that work ourselves, but we integrate the knowledge from that work so it can train our models and so we can pursue drug repurposing ideas.
Which is absolutely fascinating to me. It seems to me that when you look at traditional pharma, this kind of R&D would cost trillions of dollars for traditional pharma pursuing a for-profit new drug. Is that a mindset that is difficult for you to overcome, or is pharma embracing what you're doing?
You know, the pharmaceutical industry is I don't demonize them at all. They do an incredible job at generating novel compounds that they can market and return shareholder value with. And it's not their fault that there's just no incentive to pursue additional research around drugs that are off patent and are generic and no one can make money on. And so that actually represents around 80% of all drugs. So you have these precious molecules of life-saving capability that trillions of dollars have gone into producing that now sit on our pharmacy shelves and are sort of ironically or paradoxically not pursued further in terms of significant research efforts. And so we take we stand on the shoulders, of that incredible effort to just push it past, we feel like we're on the 99-yard line with all of these drugs. And it's our mission to take all that incredible work and just do the little bit of more effort it takes to find the additional diseases that they could potentially treat. So I am more than happy to work with the pharmaceutical industry, and they're generally happy to work with us because we're not a threat to them. We are enhancing the use of the things that they've already built.
Yeah. And how do you handle there must be in the vast morass of how we're handling medical data, privacy issues, et cetera, and then throw on top of that regulatory issues, intellectual property issues, legal issues. How are you traversing all of those? It seems like it could be quite an impenetrable maze for a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's a really complicated landscape. There's all sorts of different, like, as you mentioned, IP issues. There's different routes to FDA approval. One way we stay out of it is by staying out of it. If we do the research, and we're not looking to pursue IP, we're not looking to capture IP, and we're not looking to then license it out or sell it to someone else. We're just simply identifying the viability of a drug and a disease, and we generate the evidence package that is sufficient to convince the physician and research community of its truth. Then it can update guidelines, and it can be prescribed by physicians. Doctors can prescribe off-label. They can prescribe any drug for any purpose they see medically fit. And it doesn't have to necessarily be FDA approved for that initial purpose. The real trick is making sure that insurance companies actually cover it when it is prescribed in that way.
So, hypothetically, would one of the potential outcomes from you building these amazing graphs and data sets be where you could find not only a new use for an existing drug that's been approved for something else, but a combination of existing compounds that leads to a brand new drug? And if that happens, then how do you deal with the IP issues, et cetera? Or, since you're a nonprofit, do they just become part of the common data set for others to pursue?
Yeah, so it's really not our focus. We're not designing novel compounds. We think that there's so much low-hanging fruit with the 3,000 drugs that already exist that we're going to spend years and years unlocking the life-saving potential of those. And the reason why we're focused there is because that is the fastest way to save human lives. Because you don't have to, if you develop a novel compound, you have to go all the way through the entire clinical development and approval process, IND, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. This takes years and years and hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas in certain scenarios in drug repurposing, just like with my co-founder David, within weeks of us coming up with the hypothesis that this drug might work for him, as long as we could find a physician that would prescribe it to him, it went directly into his human body just weeks later. So that brings me to sort of this issue that I think we're going to see and you as an investor might make yourself aware of, is that there's going to be lots and lots of failures in the world of AI-driven drug discovery. And that's because not only are you an AI company that's generating hypotheses, you're also a biotech company that has to validate a novel compound and bring it all the way through the clinic, through clinical trials and through regulatory approvals and into patients. So here you are, an AI company. You've hired up your team of 50 data scientists and experts, and you come up with your hypothesis. And you say, okay, great. You're not Amazon that gets to A/B test where they're going to put a button like on the user interface, and then they get feedback by the end of the day, and okay, move the button here instead of here. When you come up with your hypothesis after your AI team says, okay, this is what the drug we're gonna move forward with, you now have to go through potentially 10 years and hundreds of millions of dollars of additional development. So you don't know if your AI team built anything of value. You don't have that validation feedback loop that you do in other AI consumer-based organizations. So now you're juggling sustaining an AI corporation that doesn't have a feedback loop while you have to also pay for the clinical development of a drug. And so it's just it's a tension that's hard to manage. And drug repurposing solves that tension. It allows us to go from hypothesis to validation in a much tighter feedback loop. So what we're doing is something that both helps patients in the fastest and cheapest way possible, but also the happy accident is that we push forward the field of data-driven drug discovery because we can inform our models in a faster feedback loop.
Yeah, to me, it's just like almost mind-blowing the way that you can take the new AIs that we have developed and take this huge body of knowledge and repurpose things that we wouldn't even. I think that's one of the use cases of AI. You and I can't look at a data array of 100 million items and figure out which 7 fit together in that wonderful lock and key mechanism. Whereas, of course, AI, that is kind of what it's designed to do. Have you looked at? I presume, but correct me if I'm wrong. Are you extending it to not just existing drugs in the marketplace, but to the the historical use of plant medicine, of a variety of those things? And if so, where are your data sources there?
Yeah, these are, and some of the knowledge graphs that already exist, they do include some of these, nutraceuticals and other sort of active pharmaceutical ingredients that could be relevant to this kind of work. But in terms of getting it directly into patients, we're going to only pursue concepts that are readily available to either to be prescribed or to a consumer. Yeah, I think another interesting thing about this particular application in artificial intelligence is that you can't trust the AI completely. We're certainly not there. I think someday in the future, maybe 100 years from now, we'll say, "My God, we tested drugs on humans. That's how barbaric." What a dangerous and awful thing to do. But we're not there, and in the meantime, we do have to test it on humans, and so. The way that we do that now is that there has to be an incredibly tight interface in your development of your algorithms and your platform with medical expertise. And so one thing I learned when I was at Quantum Black and at McKinsey is, and we would go up against other machine learning organizations. I remember one time they put us head to head with another group. And they said, okay, whoever comes with the best insights in the next 3 months, we're gonna pick to go with a longer contract going forward. And two seemingly similar teams working on the same data set, we came up with a totally different recommendations than the other team did. And what was the actual differentiator between the teams was that we had 5 medical degrees on our team. Not just a bunch of data scientists, but data scientists plus medical experts. And in every step of the way that you're building these knowledge graphs and designing these algorithms, you're interfacing with medical expertise to make sure you imbue it with clinical understanding, with biological rationale of how this is actually going to work and how to interpret the typically really messy medical data. And so if you think about what, the matrix that we're producing, this heat map of 3,000 drugs cross-referenced with 22,000 diseases, creates 66 million possibilities. And we then score those possibilities from 0 to 1 and normalize them across, the whole landscape. So that's like a tricky thing to do is, disease, drug A for disease X compared to drug B for disease Y. How do you compare the possibilities of each of those from 0 to 1? So we create that normalized score, and then we start looking at the highest scores and then filter down from there to say, okay, of all the highest possibility opportunities here, highest probability of success opportunities here, which ones are going to impact patients the most, and which ones can we prove out quickly and efficiently in a low-cost trial with a few amount of patients and high signal. So we can do this in 3 to 6 to 12-month bursts and suppose to 5-year trial times. And the thing to think about, back to the comment about we need medical expertise highly integrated with what we're doing, is that even if you take the top 1,000 scores there, you're still in the 0.001% of the highest ranking of scores. And now you got to pick amongst your 1,000 to get down to the top 5. To get down to the top 1, what is my first shot on goal going to be? That better be successful for all the things that I'm working on here. And it better help patients, and it really better work. So the AI can't do that. You need a really smart, head of translational science to make that last sort of decision of what's going to go into patients and how it's all going to work.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the human in the loop use of AI, particularly in very complicated and sophisticated research like this. You absolutely, at least in my opinion, I agree 100% with you. You need human experts in the loop that can use the tools, which are incredible tools, absolutely. But yeah, as you rightly point out, you can't just leave it to the tools because there are a lot of hallucinations. You mentioned the 100 years from now, we'll probably be looking back and saying, oh my God, we tested drugs on actual living human beings. What are your thoughts on where are we? Rather than your thoughts, I would like to ask you, where are we in our ability to take somebody's entire genome, create a digital twin, and then do experiments with those drugs in silico as opposed to in actual real life?
We're getting close. We're not there yet. So right now when I say we're mapping, 3,000 drugs versus 22,000 diseases, I think in the future we're mapping 3,000 drugs to 8 billion people. And it'll be, okay, layer on in this knowledge graph that we're constructing Jim's exact genome and proteome and transcriptome and latest lab samples, et cetera, to come up with a drug that is fit for however the disease expresses itself specifically in Jim's body. But in terms of creating that digital twin, that is it requires us to create the perfect knowledge graph. The knowledge graph that is effectively the exact representation of reality of the human body, and we're just not there yet. There's so much unknown. There's a guy named Larry Hunter, kind of one of the fathers of this data-driven research, and he I don't know if he coined the term, but he uses it, and I love this. It's called you have the genome, the transcriptome, and the proteome, and all these omes, and there's also the ignorome. There's this area of biology that we simply don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. We don't even know the shape of it when we look at the graph. So I really like that, and the work that we do, the compiling of all this information, all these continued assays and drug discovery efforts, all work to continue to elucidate that area, that ignorome, so we can eliminate it and ultimately make these perfect digital twins and therefore make these perfect predictions.
I love that term, and it seems to be part of the basic DNA of human OS. The ignorance part. The idea of extending the research. I'm interested in, for example, have you considered like using medical chatbots with existing patients, where they could take an interrogation or a conversation and or do a meta-analysis of all the online health forums where people are talking about, yeah, I have disease X. They put me on drug Y. Here are the complications, or it worked perfectly for me. Is that type of meta-analysis an aggregation of a more colloquial way of people just talking to one another about the particular disease? Could that be helpful?
Absolutely. I think the way I think about it, though, is less consumer facing and more research focused. So I'll tell you kind of, and I'll maybe give you a step back and further, like how are we using large language models? So one way is to actually digest and interpret all of medical literature. So imagine, so you've got PubMed and PubMed Central. Those are public resources for papers that are not behind paywalls or anything. But then you have other organizations like Elsevier, these medical literature publication organizations that have 7 million extremely high quality, highly curated life science scientific papers. And we're working with them to use large language models to read effectively every single paper and extract all those biomedical concepts that I described before. So if it ever mentions, a protein or a drug or a disease, et cetera, not just extracting the concept, but also the relationship that is described and understood within each paper. So this is clearly something that a human could never do, but to read every single one of those 7 million papers and extract out all that knowledge, but not just understand it and then be able to report it back to you in a chatbot interface, but to be able to extract it in a tabular fashion that shows all the specific relationships between every biomedical concept that is embedded in all those papers so that it can then be layered into a knowledge graph. Pretty incredible. Then in addition to that, once you have the knowledge graph built, if you recall previously when I was describing these nodes and these edges and these semantic triples, well, a semantic triple is effectively a sentence. So could you then interpret this knowledge graph as a body of language that is connecting long strings of sentences that describe how things are connected with each other and their relationships? Additionally, in terms of using these kinds of models, you can train them not just on words and text. As you know, they work by predicting the next word in a sentence. But what if you train them on amino acid sequences and could then ask it to predict the next amino acid in a protein sequence? Or you trained it on patient journeys, the events that occur in a patient's journey through their disease longitudinally over time, and then predict the next sequence that might occur in that journey based on what the inputs on the previous part of their journey were. So these models aren't just used specifically in language; they can be used in other clever ways, and we're exploring those now. I think in terms of the chatbot interface example of that, I think it's really interesting to use it. There's a company called Atropo Health, ATRPOS, that has designed a way to query large medical record databases using a chatbot. So you could ask it to scour 160 million patients' medical records. And as a physician, you could say, have you ever seen a particular patient that has this particular medical history and has this disease and has taken this drug? What was the outcome? And it will scour all of existing medical records to see what is happening in the real world, not just what's a hypothesis like coming out of a textbook, but what actually happened. What does the reality show? We call that real world evidence. So there's a lot of different clever uses of these models, and it's not just chatbots.
I think that another use case that we've explored that we think might be advantageous and helpful would be when we were discussing various use cases in the medical stack. What about the idea of AI simply generating null hypotheses and publishing them to an electronic database that would be available to all researchers? Sort of knowledge via negativia. Do you think that that would be valuable in and intersect with the work you're doing?
Yeah, this is now we're getting to some really sci-fi stuff here where the or use AI not only to digest and understand medical literature, but use it to generate its own hypotheses. And then if you combine that with robotics and automated labs, it could potentially even test out those hypotheses, see if whether it was correct or not, utilize the output of them to feed back into its own knowledge set to then refine its hypothesis generation and rinse and repeat until it actually advances science on its own. So that that is definitely in the realm of possibility and not very far off. That's like within 10 years.
Which I often just remark that what a time to be alive. I mean, like the
Yeah.
knowledge explosion that we are undergoing right now and the innovations and whatnot. Certainly, I'm 63 and this is the most I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Have you ever read Wait But Why, the blog?
Yes,
Yeah. So,
I've actually had him on the podcast a couple of times.
oh, Tim Urban.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, he wrote a great article, or really blog post. It was almost 10 years ago now, and it was on AI, and it was on, it was reflecting on the concept of the hockey stick and sort of this compound growth in AI capabilities. And where are we now? We're at the bottom of the edge of the hockey stick, and we're starting to feel it. It's starting to happen faster and faster and faster, and it's almost like we're kind of like clinging to the edge of the side of the cliff of the hockey stick, and it's starting to accelerate, and it's only going to come faster, and and I think he created this image in his blog post where he like there's a group of people looking off in the distance like, wow, looks like AI is kind of coming here, it should be here soon, and all of a sudden it's like it's over there. So it feels like we're in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, like in doing some reading around this in anticipation of talking with you, like there's all sorts of, I mean, like it makes me just feel like a complete idiot, right? as I'm going through it all. And obviously, which is why you need the specialized knowledge that you referred to earlier. But how is it to interact? You're a classic case here. You're a medical doctor, you have an MBA, and you have a pretty deep understanding of AI and machine learning. How do you, as a medical doctor, translate it into tech speak for the AI researchers? Is that a problem?
That's a great question, and I think you uncovered or you touched on something that I think is going to be an interesting transition of what our workforce needs and what is going to be most valued. At Quantum Black, we actually called this role a translator. So you used the word. How do you translate that knowledge? And so there's this person that needs to exist, and we're actually hiring multiple of these people in my organization. That needs to be the synthesis point of the medical knowledge and medical jargon and the technical and machine learning knowledge and jargon, and being able to understand both, move information across the organization, think strategically, and elevate it, to the executive team. So that is a position that's going to be needed in every industry. So AI plus, for me, medicine, AI plus whatever else for any other industry is going to need these strategic thinkers that aren't necessarily doing the coding, but at least understand it enough to know when to use which models where, and then can think and communicate clearly so that these concepts can be advanced and people can that are making the strategic investments can make the right ones. So it's a rare skill, and I think it's going to be highly valued going forward. And for people that are out there trying to figure out, what they want to do in life, you don't necessarily have to be a coder, but if you can speak the language and then you can be a great communicator and think strategically, then there's going to be a place for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I would, of course, take it a step further. And once that person is found, I would like try to record their every interaction and have the AI train on them so that the AI itself could be improved in the communication skills of that unique and special individual.
So true, so true. Just knowledge capture in organizations is a really interesting concept on its own. Our head of data engineering is an incredible guy. He also comes from Quantum Black, and he is having us put every bit of our all of our notes and knowledge and team meetings and everything else into something called Notion. It's one of these, organizational tools. And the incredible part about it is that then there's an embedded in Notion, an AI a function where you can ask it anything. And as long as you're good about putting all of your organizational content into this platform, you can it'll answer it as if it's like ChatGPT, but with full knowledge of the internal workings of every cure. So our head of data engineering, Pascal Bruckmeyer, he's really spearheading that. And been an amazing, I feel like, advantage to our organization to have that quick understanding of everything that's going on, and anyone can ask it a question.
And how do you, as a nonprofit, obviously, I see the reason you're a nonprofit makes total sense because you're not competing with any of the for-profit. But who are your main supporters, donors, and tell our listeners and watchers how they could get involved, how they could make donations to Every Cures.
Thanks for asking that question. Yeah. So again, we're a nonprofit because we want to build the world's best AI platform, and we need the best data set to do it, to save as many lives as we possibly can with drugs that already exist. So since the drugs already exist, it's kind of a funny thing. I say we're the smallest and the biggest pharma company in the world. We're the biggest because every single drug that already exists is in our pipeline. We're the smallest because we don't own any of them. And so, and then we take those drugs and we go after diseases that are totally neglected by the pharmaceutical industry. So it's by design has to be a nonprofit. And so, our backers then are actually kind of interesting groups because the typical person that wants to fund or support a medical nonprofit is usually going after a disease that has affected them or a loved one. And so they're laser focused on figuring out that disease. We're agnostic to drug and disease. We go where the data tells us to go that's going to save the most lives. So if you're interested in just having the highest ROI on your dollar to save human lives and you don't necessarily care what disease it was, then we're the right group for you. Or if you're interested in solving a systemic issue in healthcare and how R&D is done in drug discovery, and you want to think that big, then we're the organization for you. So that doesn't always fit everyone's philanthropic intentions, and it requires us to find really big thinkers or people that just really care solely about saving human life and relieving suffering from disease. And so if either of those, fit what you're looking for, you can just go to our website. It's everycure.org. We have a donate function, or just reach out to me personally. My email is grant@everycure.org. And right now, our backers are some really great philanthropies: Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Lida Hill, Arnold Ventures, the Carolyn Smith Foundation, Newbar at Flagship Pioneering, the founder of Moderna. He's supported us, and some others that have remained anonymous. So we've had some really great philanthropic supporters. and we could not have gotten this far without them. Absolutely not. So we're so grateful that they've taken a chance on us in early days. And then we've also been really, really grateful to have secured an agreement with ARPA-H. This is a new federal agency, advanced research projects, kind of like DARPA, but for healthcare. And this was launched recently by the Biden administration with $3 billion to fund innovative technological advancements in the delivery of health for our society. And so we secured an agreement with them that should provide us with around $50 million over 3 years to build out this artificial intelligence platform. But additional funds are needed to, like I said before, take those insights from the platform and actually deliver them into patients. So the additional money is needed for validation in labs and then actually performing the clinical trials, which, as you know, can be an extremely expensive endeavor. So every dollar counts. We're an extremely frugal organization. We rely on free office space and as much support as we can get. But even then, we are still one of the best funded drug discovery AI efforts around. So we're really thrilled to be in the position that we're in to save lives.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing idea, and you're executing against it incredibly well. I will absolutely support it, and we will include a link to your website for
Thank you,
in the show
Jim. Wow.
in the show notes. I just think it's just such an amazing idea and project, and I love how focused you are on. We're going to go for the low hanging fruit. We're going to try to save as many lives as possible. I just don't. I mean, like, I've heard a lot of pitches in my life, and that's one of the strongest ones I've ever heard.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much for that support, Jim. I just really appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. What was the biggest surprise as you did the research? What emerged as a solution to a disease that had you kind of, as a doctor and your colleagues, scratching your heads and thinking, how can this drug be working for this?
Yeah, there's a few examples of that, like a flu drug that seemed to relieve dementia symptoms, and they only figured it out because it was in enough people that had dementia were also getting the flu. So you got to be able to dig it out of the research, at least empirically, not just biologically via connections, but empirically. You have to have people actually taking the drug to find the real world evidence. But I think is more shocking than these sort of novel associations is the fact that sometimes there's good research that shows a drug is going to work for a disease that is published in the literature, and it just sits there because people just don't get access to it. Other researchers and physicians don't know it was ever published. So that was the case in angiosarcoma that we found. It was a PD-1 inhibitor was suggested to maybe work in angiosarcoma. And then a patient came to us that had angiosarcoma and said, "What do I do?" Well, that paper had been published 3 years prior, and it was sitting neglected in the medical literature. We call this latent knowledge that if the physician community at large had really read and adopted, would have known. And so thousands and thousands of people died while we actually already knew the answer. And now it's been elevated so that it's part of the guidelines and people will get prescribed this drug. But that's a solution or a problem that we're solving as well, because when you compile that knowledge into one space and you generate the hypotheses, it utilizes that latent knowledge. So to me, that's the most shocking thing is that sometimes we already know the answer, but it just hasn't been adopted yet.
Wow. And that kind of leads me to, there are so many externalities involved here. Like you see people being for or against a particular regime or drug therapy for reasons that have nothing to do with its efficacy and or, as we saw during COVID. How do you cut through all of that extraneous noise and just focus on solving the problem?
Yeah, well, we actually did something called the Corona Project during COVID, where we evaluated the evidence of every single drug that was attempted in COVID. Amazingly, I said before, there's only around 3,000 or so FDA approved drugs, actually a little less than that. 500 to 600 of them were attempted in COVID. So,
Wow.
so like a sixth of all drugs were tried for COVID. It was the greatest drug repurposing effort ever globally, and there probably ever will be ever again. So, um, there's just a ton of noise when in an effort like that. And when you combine it with the politicization of the time, it was just kind of a nightmare for the public messaging of what was working. And so we tried to solve that by evaluating the evidence. It was over 75 some thousand different papers that was compiled in just a short amount of time. And you can if you Google the Corona Project and you look up our evidence, you'll see us grade from A to F the level of evidence that we think was been compiled from literature in an objective way. So to me, the answer to that question is just do your best to uncover objective reality with the proper scientific research tools that we have.
Yeah, and keep your eye on the prize, exactly, because there just seems to me we are increasing signal exponentially, but we are also increasing noise, maybe even more exponential. I know that that's a
Absolutely.
malicious way of looking at it, but the amount of noise that we are now confronted with is massive, much more massive than any humans of the past, certainly.
Hmm.
But projects like yours bring the signal, hopefully, to the front of the analysis. So what would be? I know that you've got a very long-term plan here, but what would be the next milestone that, like, when you achieve it, like, you're like, okay, now we're getting much closer to where we want to be.
Yeah, so just the general timeframes of what we're doing here is, so we signed the government agreement on April 1st of this year. So just earlier this month. And that's when the contract launched. So now we're really off to the races because that was a much more significant amount of funding than previously. Previously, the funding had really helped us build sort of the beginning stages of our platform, kind of a beta version of the knowledge graph and the scores and the ranking systems. But now we're building this at scale with a large team and infrastructure that is professionalized. And so year one is all about building the database and the knowledge graph, compiling all of the public sources, compiling all the additional private and proprietary data sources, and generating some of our own data. So by the end of year one, we should have constructed this biomedical knowledge graph. And we're actually going to give that away to researchers and society. So we're going to have everyone can access that so they can explore it, query it, do their own research on top of it. We hope that's a real boon to the scientific and research community to have access to that resource. Year two is developing the scores, that heat map that I mentioned to you. By the end of year two, we actually plan to publish that as well. So a visualization tool that's dynamic and navigable by both researchers and physicians and even patients to zoom in on their drug of interest or their disease of interest to say, okay, nothing else is working for this patient. What else might be possible? And have it actually, and to zoom in on their disease, you'd see a rank ordered list of all 3,000 drugs and the probability of each one of them to work for the disease of your focus. And so that we hope is another boon to researchers to say, okay, where's the heat? If I'm agnostic to drug and disease, where should I look? How should I allocate resources? If I'm focused just on one disease, where should I look across the drugs to allocate resources and do further research, or even help inform what I'm going to do for a patient? And then once those scores are built and both the database and knowledge graph and heat map are released to the world, that's when we start moving our drugs into the clinic, the Evercure drugs that we select, that we think are going to have the highest impact on patients. People can pursue all the other things that are in that graph on their own, and we hope they do. We hope that it accelerates research globally, but we're going to go for the ones that help the most patients. And so, to me, the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is that first time that we confirm that a drug works in a disease and it goes into that patient population and starts saving lives. That's absolutely what motivates all of us. In the meantime, we actually use the graph and the preliminary results to inform some of our thinking, and we've been able to help a small amount of patients with that. But we have to stay focused on getting to this scaled version so that we can repurpose drugs really in perpetuity. We hope to have 20 or so repurposing opportunities packaged and ready for clinical trials and beginning to be validated by 2030. And then at steady state, hope to have, 2 to 5 drugs being repurposed every year. I know that didn't sound like much, but that's actually extremely ambitious. The entire pharmaceutical industry as a whole approves maybe 50 some drugs a year. And so, if we're doing a tenth of that as this little nonprofit, that's pretty incredible. Even like one single large pharma company might do, 2 to 5 in a year, and that would be a lot for them. So, but like I said, there's this faster, more scalable, more efficient way to get these drugs to patients, and we hope to really automate that and build an engine that works in perpetuity, that just doesn't rest until every drug is unlocked to treat every disease that it possibly can.
Yeah, and that brings in the idea of using this as open source AI, which I think I'm a huge fan of because of everything you've listed, but also because it allows for the tinkerers and cognitive diversity. It's like I quote a lot, the quote about, you could have somebody who's the smartest human in the world. They know the most about everything, but you could never ask them to make a list of things that would never occur to them. And and so those things often do occur to others. And the only way to capture that in the knowledge is through the open source, through the ability for many, many people to work on the project and suggest contributions. And obviously, the contribution will stand or fall on its efficacy in the trials. But I think that too is just an incredibly noble and worthwhile project. So you kind of achieved the hat trick here, Grant. Like if there are current saints, you might get nominated, and your partners.
I got that, but there's a concept. I've even heard this. Someone told me this a few years ago. There's this Japanese concept called Ikigai. Have you heard of this?
I have.
Yeah, this reason for being,
Yes.
the center of the Venn diagram of what are you good at, what do you love, what does the world need, and what can you get paid for? If you can find something that hits all 4 of those, and you can be right in the middle of there, well, then you've really found something that can get you out of bed every day. And for me, this is certainly what that is, and certainly for my co-founders as well. So we feel just really privileged and blessed to be part of an organization like this. And I'll tell you what, it has been a delight to build this organization because it attracts really smart but really mission-driven people. And when you have everyone that's aligned, rowing together in the same direction, and you've got this, North Star of these patients that are suffering, that we are helping, and we're relieving that suffering and saving their lives, the team dynamics and the culture is really fabulous. So we've been lucky to be able to attract a lot of really high quality, high performing people that care about this and work really well together to achieve what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote that probably wasn't from Mark Twain, although it's often attributed to him. He said, "The 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you discover why." So I think, Grant, that you and your team have discovered the why and are at that perfect pitch point of the Ikigai graph. I think that this is an amazing thing you're doing. I will support it. I urge all of our listeners and viewers to do the same. This is life-changing stuff. And I just think it's so incredible how far you've come and yet how far you have to go and why you need the support. Well, if you listen to the podcast in the past, you know that we do ask a final question where we make you the emperor of the world for just a day. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp, but we do hand you a magical microphone in which you can say two things. And the two things that you say will incept all 8 billion plus people of the world for whatever their next day is when they wake up. They're going to wake up and they're going to think, I've just had the two greatest ideas, but this time I'm going to act against both of these things. I'm going to start acting immediately against these two things. What are you going to incept in the world's population, Grant?
Wow, that's a big question, and I hadn't thought of this yet. So give me a moment. This is
sure.
That's and I'm incepting it as if like it's like the movie Inception. I went into their dreams and I implanted this idea. Okay,
exactly.
Gotcha. I think there's one idea is this notion that you are they. And what I mean by that is, when David and I first started thinking about Castleman disease and whether we could solve it or not, whether we could cure his own rare disease, we first said, well, surely they must be working on this. And we did a little research and we said, oh my God, there's really no one out there. So where are they? And then we looked at it like, could we be they, And there's no reason, whatever problem you're thinking about, whatever it is, that you can't be they. They don't assume that they's out there in a little factory tinkering, working on all the problems in just the way you think they should be. They're not. You can be they. So get up and go do it.
I love that one.
And I think the other thing that I would say is that the world responds to clarity of vision. So, the Ikigai concept is one thing, but it's like you can't have your Ikigai until you have the clarity of vision. And when you tell the world exactly what you need, exactly what you're doing, and exactly why you're doing it, resources fall in line. If you tell the world, I don't really know what I want to do, like, can you help me? Can you tell me? No one really gets behind that. You might get a mentor or two, but resources are not going to start flooding your way. When you take a stand, when you have the courage to say, okay, I'm going to put my line in the sand and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take a risk to tell everyone that I know that I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the ask. I'm going to ask that guy I know that would be the world's best in this to work with me. I'm going to ask this guy that I know has got the funds to finance it. And I'm going to tell the world I'm going to do this. That's when things start happening, and no one's going to do that for you. You have to make that decision to express that clarity and have the courage to stand behind it and refine the idea as it goes. But until you tell the world what you need, the world's not going to give it to you. Wow.
I love both of those. They might actually rank among some of the best inceptions that I've ever had. I've had lots of guests, Grant. This has been amazing. I wish you absolutely the best of luck with the project. As I said, I will contribute. I will urge others to contribute. I don't know, like clarity of vision, boy. You make it very easy to want to give you money. So congratulations. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it.